ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi, I'm Julia Baird.
And I'm Jeremy Fernandez, and this week on Not Stupid, the heckle at the Australian Open.
The true story about tennis's handling of allegations of domestic violence.
Look for Not Stupid on the ABC Listen app.
When Donald Trump returned to power, he unveiled DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, a cost-cutting body run by the world's richest man, Elon Musk. Last weekend, Peter Dutton unveiled the coalition's brand new spokeswoman for government efficiency, supposed to cut wasteful spending. Today, host of the Party Room podcast, Patricia Karvelas, on why the opposition leader will only go so far down the Trump path. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. PK, when Peter Dutton announced his new frontbench during the Australia Day long weekend, well, it was Trumpesque. That was certainly how it was perceived, wasn't it?
It certainly was. Wall to wall, the coverage was that it was very Trumpesque. And it did include a new government efficiency portfolio, of course, to crack down on wasteful spending, which was the most obvious example of the similarities.
In a surprise move, he's created a new portfolio, one that appears to come straight from US President Donald Trump's playbook.
Jacinta Nampijinpa Price will also become the Shadow Minister for Government Efficiency.
An apparent nod to Donald Trump's appointment of Elon Musk as head of government efficiency in the US.
The Albanese government has spent money like drunken sailors. The whole idea of Jacinta's appointment is to continue the work of coalition governments past, to clean up Labor's mess, to identify where taxpayers' money is being wasted.
So the current Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, has been given that role in a move which I do think has pretty big similarities, eerie similarities perhaps, with the new US Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, as it's known, led by Elon Musk.
DOGE. Oh, gosh.
Peter Dutton consistently reminds the public about the voice referendum. It may have been lost and many people might have just thought that's all over, but he wants to remind the public that in the first term of the Albanese government, they focused on this voice referendum and clearly the no side prevailing.
Not only was $500 million wasted and the Prime Minister divided the country, but I think with the outcome, there are many Australians who felt that a dark cloud had been lifted from their heads and they were able to speak out on different issues, and they were sick of being told that they should be ashamed of their country.
Just on a side, a few days before the announcement, the mining magnate Gina Rinehart had been advocating for this same sort of Musk-style department in Australia. Is that significant or not?
I think it is.
Yeah.
It's part of the story. So, on January the 22nd, Rinehart had said, if we are sensible, we should set up a DOGE immediately to reduce government waste and government red tape, regulations, all of that. Why is that significant? Well, we're talking about the tech bros a lot, aren't we, in the US? The tech billionaires who clearly have a front row seat and influence in the Trump administration. I mean, they had better seats at the inauguration than his cabinet. And we are now looking at our own billionaires, and we have some.
Yes.
Gina Rinehart is clearly one of the most influential ones. She is close to the coalition, we know that, and has some pretty strong views about all of these issues. She's also has spent a bit of time at Mar-a-Lago and is a big fan of the Trump agenda, and so she'd like to see a little bit of that here.
And PK, look, this isn't the only comparison, right, that people have drawn between what Peter Dutton is doing, what Peter Dutton is saying in the lead up to this election, and Trump.
No, and there are similarities, and people are right to point them out. But I wrote a piece this week looking at the broader situation and why we're seeing some of this. So is Peter Dutton just aping the Trump agenda? Well, he's cherry-picking parts that he thinks will resonate in our electorate, 100%. But he is being selective about the things that he's choosing that he thinks will resonate in Australia. That's his assessment, no doubt, based on some research that the Coalition has been doing. Now, there are a few different things about Australia. One of them, of course, is that we are a compulsory voting country. We are therefore forced, and I think it's a good thing, to be a little more moderate than swinging to the extremes, whether they be left or right. And so I think we're seeing some examples of Peter Dutton cherry-picking things he thinks will be resonant in the electorate and then perhaps not going gung-ho on some of the other things. In terms of the DOGE stuff and waste and, you know, the sort of language around Washington in the case of America, but Canberra here, it's not entirely new. Peter Dutton's broader talking points and agenda is not kind of all from the Trump playbook. Some of it is just right-wing playbook 101 stuff, right? When former Prime Minister Tony Abbott was first elected, there was also a focus on government efficiencies. Timing, of course, does matter. Dutton has made the calculation that this frustration with Canberra does echo what's happening in the US with the frustration with Washington, the so-called frustration with elites, people who are out of touch, the class of people who make all the decisions and are out of touch with working class parts of either America or Australia. So that's where that comes from. But I think in Australia there's also fertile ground for Labor to fight back on that, because it's also sometimes code for slashing and burning, and people don't like it when things which are services to them are slashed and burned, and I can see Labor going down that road as it tries to argue against Peter Dutton's agenda.
All right, so you certainly don't think, though, Peter Dutton goes as far, I suppose, as Donald Trump. Let's look at that issue of wokeness as well, or the pushback against it, which we see from Donald Trump. You say there are two examples, I suppose, when we can see that Peter Dutton just wouldn't go there. He wouldn't do what Donald Trump is doing.
Yeah, and the two examples that I saw in the last week or so, the first one, which he's been quite consistent on, is not pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. Now, why wouldn't he want to pull out, right? Clearly some of his backbench, I'm thinking people like Matt Canavan, have been urging him to. They, I suppose, are more sort of Trumpist voices, if you want to call them that, or they're very, very excited by the Trump agenda, things like pulling out of these multinational agreements. Peter Dutton has resisted that. And I think there's a reason back to Australia is a different place, and he knows it. So he's got to win all these teal seats if he really wants to be Prime Minister. Those seats were lost because people couldn't stand Scott Morrison, to be blunt, and didn't like the Morrison government's agenda. Then all these teal MPs won them. Now the Liberals would like to get them back. In those electorates, these are highly educated, highly engaged people. Climate change is still an issue. It didn't disappear in the last 3 years. They are still quite activated on issues around climate change. And so if Peter Dutton just did a copy-paste and said, I'm going to pull out of Paris, I imagine in this landscape, in the Australian context, that wouldn't kind of sing in those parts of Australia. So Peter Dutton on that issue has differentiated. The other one was on this kind of war against transgender, which is going on in the United States. This executive order from Trump for there to be just two genders, when clearly on Australian documentation we do have other options. People who are non-binary, who do identify transgender. There is some diversity in our community.
Australia is a sovereign nation, and as Prime Minister, I'll act in our country's best interest, and I'll make decisions that I think are in the best interests of all Australians. So we don't have any plans to change our position in relation to that issue.
The word sovereignty was used by Peter Dutton when asked if he would follow that line. He said, we're a different country and Australia is a sovereign nation. And I think that matters. I think he's kind of sending a signal that he won't just copy and paste the Trump playbook. That's not to say that his war on woke or war on progressive causes isn't still a thing. It certainly is, but he's being very selective about which of those progressive causes that he campaigns against.
Whether your family has a 60,000-year connection with this country or whether you came to Australia yesterday, we are equal Australians. We don't have different standards of citizenship in this country. We are all equal and we should treat each other accordingly, respectfully. Labor's desire to continue these culture wars and to try and pander to the left and the Prime Minister out trying to please the Greens all the time. He knows that the Greens don't like Australia Day, which is why he's always equivocated on these matters. But
the backlash to the voice and the subsequent backlash we're seeing to changing the date of Australia Day, which was becoming more popular, and now there's been a swing back to supporting January 26th being the date. Things like that demonstrate that there is a shift. Peter Dutton knows that. He wants to exploit that. That works for his politics. That works for his point of difference. But he's also aware that if he just apes, as I say, just copies and pastes the whole playbook, that will probably push the buttons of Australians too far. And they're kind of allergic to extreme ideology. Australians are not highly ideological people.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And the thing is, when the comparisons are made between Peter Dutton and Donald Trump, once upon a time that might have been derogatory, right? But now, Trumpism, it's not really derogatory anymore, is it?
Well, it can't be derogatory, certainly when government ministers talk, and I'll explain. They're trying to build this relationship with Donald Trump. They're being so careful not to criticise any of his decisions, his administration, because we want to carve out a deal when it comes to tariffs. We want to make sure that the AUKUS deal continues. And so as a result, our left-leaning government is being very careful not to criticise what is quite a right-wing government in the United States. So that means they can also have to be very careful about criticising anything that Peter Dutton does that's within the Trump ethos and calling it Trumpesque. Now, that doesn't mean they can't criticise Peter Dutton's culture wars or the way that he decides to go forward on different debates. But I think that makes it different. And the other thing which I think is key is if you look at Australian surveys so far, although it'd be interesting to see if any of them shift, Donald Trump isn't particularly popular in Australia, right? I mean, if Donald Trump and Kamala Harris were our candidates, if you look at all the polling, Kamala Harris would have won. So Donald Trump is someone that the Australian electorate broadly is concerned about.
But it sounds like Peter Dutton knows Australians don't want to become a mini America, right? So he's walking a line. And he's pretty good at walking these lines, isn't he? He's a pretty savvy political player, that's for sure.
People forget how long Peter Dutton has been in politics. I mean, he was a minister in the Howard government. He has been around the block. And so as a result, I think he's quite underestimated, just like I think Albanese was actually quite underestimated. These are very experienced politicians. And so there is a very fine line. Is he walking it? Well, he's trying to, but, watch the next couple of months because Australians are mainly interested in their hip pocket. They don't want to keep talking about culture wars.
Patricia Karvelas is the host of the Party Room podcast. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Cara Jensen-McKinnon. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. To get in touch with the team, please email us on ABC News Daily at abc.net.au. Thanks for listening.